Welcome to Talking with Tatchell. The government is pressing ahead with its plans for national identity cards. There are, of course, big question marks about their effectiveness, their cost, their threat to civil liberties, and, of course, the implications of invasion of privacy. With me to discuss the campaign against the identity cards is the National Coordinator of No to ID, Phil Booth.
Hi, Peter.
You're the head of the campaign against identity cards and the database state.
That's correct.
Can you just give us an update about where we're at with the legislation and the implementation of the identity card scheme?
Right, well, at the moment, as you probably know, the government passed the legislation, so there is now actually an Identity Cards Act 2006. But in terms of actually bringing the scheme into force, they've made little to no progress in the last year, which is, given the pressure that they were putting on Parliament to push this onto the statute books, is quite surprising, and given the claims that they've made for how necessary they say it is, somewhat sort of contradictory, you might say. What we are seeing right now, and in the last several weeks, is that the government is bringing forward a whole raft of other pieces of legislation, though. And we at No to ID claim that these, and have proven that these, are new laws which will contain necessary powers for building the National Identity Register. Because although it's called identity cards, in fact, the scheme is more about the huge database that is going to be sort of behind the card, which will hold all of everyone's information on it and be used to track it.
What is the new information?
So the new information is there's a schedule attached to the Identity Cards Act which defines about 50 categories of information that is going to be stored on every person in the country. Now, that starts off with things that you might sort of think it would, with your name or any name that you have been known by, your address, but not just your current address, literally every address you've ever been at, things like your date of birth and all those sorts of things. But then it goes into other areas like the number of every official document that you've ever been issued with. So like your passport number, your driving license number, your NHS number. And that's where it really starts to get quite worrying with regards to privacy and with regard to what is the government actually building here. They're going to sort of try and triangulate you down, sort of pin people down and say, well, we know you in this way and that way and the other way, and we might not be storing your medical records on this database, but because we've got your NHS number, should we ever need to look you up, we can just check back with the register and go and find out where those are. And then the most worrying aspect of this of the sort of fields of information that they're going to be storing on people is the one that they call the audit trail. Essentially, this is a record of every single time you present your card and it's checked against the register, or someone just checks you out to find out who you are. That audit trail over time will build up an unprecedented picture of the population. No country in the world, including places like the Republic of China, former Soviet states, no one has tried to surveil the whole population to this extent in the whole of human history. We really are talking about something very, very different from just a plastic card, and something which is incredibly worrying. Incredibly worrying, and they're pushing it forward now. So as I say, the pieces of legislation that are coming forward at the moment are sort of enabling the government, because it's currently illegal for even the government to share and compare information between databases. So it's having to pass a law, and it's hiding it under other reasons. So we've got at the moment the UK Borders Bill, which they're using to connect information between the Immigration and Nationality Directorate in the Home Office and the tax records in Treasury. And you think, well, it's a UK Borders Bill. Why is in the tax? Why in a Borders Bill is the primary bit of data sharing about tax records and IND? You can sort of understand the latter, but maybe not the former. So there are, we think, 4 bills at the moment, and probably more coming forward. UK Borders, the Serious Crime Bill, one called Digital Switchover, simply about well, on the face of it, trying to help people to get from analogue television to digital television. But in order to do that, they're going to link the national insurance number to benefits information. And then another one that is about sort of statistics and changing the way that the government actually looks at official statistics. So that obviously allows them to link up lots of different databases as well. So we are in really quite at the moment, maybe it is quite below the radar to the general public, but a lot of stuff is being done in Parliament, and quite cynically, at a point where probably, because of the internal sort of situation in the Labour Party, waiting for who's going to take over from Tony Blair, there's probably going to be very little resistance from the backbenchers. So we're looking at a situation where things are being forced through just in time to sort of prepare for the next stage of the Identity Cards Bill.
I understand that in the coming weeks, the first interrogations of applicants are going to take place. What's that going to involve?
Well, we're only just finding out now. This is something which it was definitely going to happen, but only in the last, I think, couple of weeks or so. The Passport Office have said, essentially, anyone who's applying for their first adult passport, so their first 10-year passport, so that's anyone from age 16 or over, who is living near to one of the new enrolment centres, as the government calls them. This is like a network of about 69 new buildings, new offices, where you
quite sinister enrolment centres.
Enrolment. The language they're trying to sort of keep it fairly sort of light touch. But I mean, we're calling them interrogation centres. I don't see how it isn't an interrogation to be. You will be compelled to go in. You won't have a choice. And it will be completely arbitrary as well. But essentially, they're building this network of enrolment centres, as they call them, and when you apply, the information that you put on your forms will be taken. Then the Passport Service will check that information that you give and build up a dossier on you. So it will go and look at other government databases that it's allowed to look into. It will check with things like the credit reference agencies, going back into your other records. And it will build up a sequence of questions that then, when you're called in for this interrogation, you will have to answer what the government thinks it knows about you. Now, we know that a lot of government databases are polluted with incorrect and out-of-date data. It's completely unclear at this stage whether, when you go in, you might know, clearly you know everything about yourself. You might give the correct answer, but it might not match what the government thinks it knows about you. What's going to happen then? Are people going to be denied their passports? Who knows? But the reason why this links into the ID cards is this is the process by which the government is intending to get people enrolled on this National Identity Register that I was talking about, the big database. This is 1/3 of the process, checking out your biographical details, the written data component of it. And as time goes on and the government start to introduce fingerprinting, biometric scanning, then that will be added in, and they're basically building up this sort of record that will then be the basis for issuing you with an ID card.
What's the government saying it's going to cost? What's the government's estimate?
Well, the government's estimates are pretty consistently now around the sort of $5.5 billion mark. But this is just for what the Home Office says the Home Office will spend. This is not what it's going to even cost government as a whole. It's just what it's going to cost the Home Office to set up its bit, like the database and the various bits that fall within its remit. Clearly, if people are going to have to use ID cards in their interactions with other government agencies and government departments, then those departments are going to have to spend money to make their systems comply with the register. So, as I say, there are other estimates out there. There's just been a one came out literally earlier this week, which said, well, looking at the number of transactions that the government is saying they're going to be doing every year, they reckon at least double. So we're talking about at least 10 billion, and there's some very sort of more independent estimates by the London School of Economics, for example, and some other industry bodies who've put the figure as high as £20 billion. And again, that's basically just for what it costs the government to do it. It's not what it costs us, the citizens. It's not what it costs business to be compliant with it. So, the full costs have not come out by any stretch of the imagination yet, and we are definitely now talking, over 10 billion, possibly tens of billions by the time this thing is actually rolled out onto the whole population.
And you mentioned about the cost to us, the citizens.
Yeah.
Do you want to explain that?
Well, I mean, this is something where the government doesn't even factor it in. It says blandly, "Oh, this will cost you." I think so. They're saying £30 for a standalone card, but actually most people will get it with their passport, which will now jump up to £93 for your passport. And you don't have a choice about whether or not you get the ID card. It's 93 quid, like it or lump it. But you're going to have to take time off work to go to this interview. You're going to have to travel to the centre. These things are, even if there's 70 of them or 69 of them up and running, that for some people that's still an 80-mile round trip. This is going to take a whole day off work, plus the cost of travel. This is all at your own cost, out of your own pocket. And as I say, what you actually pay, the sort of the price sticker on the card itself is not the half of it. Once costs start to escalate and spread, we'll be paying for it through our council tax when local authorities have to start using ID cards for providing services. We'll be paying through our general taxation for yet another huge government IT scheme that goes completely out of control.
What about if individuals have to change their data, like they move address and things like that? Are they going to be charged, or are they going to have to do a repeat interview?
Well, the Identity Cards Act 2006 makes it absolutely explicit that the Secretary of State has the power to issue charges for a whole range of things that can be done. So if you change your name, if someone gets married or what have you, there could be a charge there. If you change address, clearly, lots of people move in every year, you're going to have to do that. Biometrics actually do change. People have this idea that, fingerprints for life or, something like that. But no, I mean, as people get older, their fingerprints actually wear down. If you injure yourself, you may change the fingerprint in such a way that it can't be read or matched to the old fingerprint that's stored on the computer. There are all sorts of things that could change, and for each of those, the government could well charge. Now, what they haven't done yet, because I imagine they were really reluctant to give people yet another reason to hate the scheme. They haven't issued a set of charges that they're expecting to do, but I think you can probably draw a comparison, if you like, with other official documents. So, for anything that requires you to actually exchange your ID card, I think they'd probably charge of the order of what they'd charge you if you had to exchange your driving licence or something like that. And so you're looking up around the, I don't know whether it's 17, 19, 20 pound mark just for something when you have to change the card over. There are all sorts of fees, if you like, that can go in there, but the stuff that they have clearly defined is the penalties. If you fail to turn up for that interview when you get called in, that's a £1,000 fine. If you fail to inform the government when your circumstances change, that's another £1,000 fine. So there's a series of penalties as well as charges. So this really is, it's a compulsory thing to be registered. You're forced to hand over your information and pay the government to take it. Then you're constrained to keep that information, and again, by penalties made to keep the information up to date. And the ultimate irony of it is the government then turns a buck selling your information because they're talking about actually doing verification services. So they will charge someone to check you out. They're making money off nationalising our identities to pay for their own scheme.
And how is, say, business going to be affected, or you mentioned local councils, or
absolutely, well,
the health service?
The health service, any organisation, business, sector that delivers a service which falls under the requirements of the Act, and the government has done some projections on this. They're talking about 265 government agencies. So it'd be like the Benefits Agency and various departments that members of the public have relationships with, and up to I think 44,000 businesses. So you're talking about your high street banks, you're talking about employers, anyone who can be forced by government to check people's ID, so an employer obviously, would have to get a scanner or a card reader or something to check out new employees if they're going to comply with the legislation on illegal working or what have you. So all sorts of businesses can be made to comply, and then they will have to, like I say, not only buy the scanner but fit it into their systems. Train people up to, scan people and check people. So there's going to be, yet more red tape for business, yet more bureaucracy for the citizen who's currently sort of having to jump through plenty of hoops anyway to get things like benefits and pensions and access to healthcare, and for no real value, because unfortunately this system that they're talking about is not going to be delivering benefits even on the government's own projections until sometime towards the end of the next decade. There just won't be enough of these ID cards in circulation to deliver the sorts of anti-fraud benefits, even if it did work.
That's a very good point. You've raised, even if it did work.
Even if it did work, yeah.
There are big question marks over its effectiveness. Will it stop terrorism? Will it stop crime?
Yeah.
What's your response to the government's argument this is a necessary weapon in the armoury against terrorism and crime?
Sure. The government has made some very strong claims about this. They've made from the outset 4 main claims, as you say. Terrorism was one of them. Tackling illegal immigration was another. Dealing with fraud, particularly sort of benefit fraud and identity fraud now is the big one, and general crime and the public services. But if you take them each one by one, ID cards just plainly cannot stop terrorists or terrorist incidents. The Home Secretary at the time, Charles Clarke, on the day after the 7/7 atrocities in London, he said he did not believe that ID cards could prevent that or any terrorist incident. A card doesn't show someone's intention. A card doesn't, have on it, stamped on it, I'm a terrorist, I'm a suicide bomber. It's something which the intelligence services don't seem particularly impressed with. The former head of MI5, Dame Stella Rimington, actually said ID cards will be useless. And just before Christmas, the deputy head of the Met, whose background is in terrorism, said ID cards won't, they're not a measure to prevent terrorism or serious and organised crime. The people who actually are trying to tackle these very serious problems don't see ID cards as a sensible measure whatsoever. You've got to tackle it with real intelligence and focus.
Why do you think the government's going ahead when all this professional expert advice is saying this ain't going to work?
Well,
or it ain't going to be effective?
It's being seen to do something. I mean, the ID card, I think, to the government became a little bit like a magic wand. They'd wave it around and say it'll sort things out. If terrorism and fear and national security was a major thing, and clearly it was, then that was when they were talking a lot about ID cards tackling terrorism. Now and at the moment, obviously, illegal immigration and illegal working is in the sort of media quite a lot at the moment. And so, well, hey presto, it's ID cards again that'll sort this out.
The magic panacea.
It's the magic panacea. I mean, we called it fairly early on. We said, look, this is a solution looking for a problem. Yeah, this is a card. We don't know what it'll do. We don't know how to do it, but they're obviously going to try and make up a whole bunch of reasons why we should have them. And hey presto, they did. Terrorism, we knocked that argument down. Illegal immigration, we knocked that argument down. Now, and things like fraud. The claims they were making on fraud to start off with were ridiculous. They were saying, yes, ID cards will help stamp out benefit fraud, which costs £2 billion a year. £2 billion a year. Well, if it did something about that, then maybe it might have been worth considering. But actually, when we probed the Department for Work and Pensions to find out how much benefit fraud was due to actual identity-related fraud, they said, well, about 20 million, maybe, So,
20 million pounds?
20 million pounds a year. So you've gone from 2 billion claim down to 20 million reality. And if you're spending 5 billion to build the thing, I think the 20 million starts to look a little bit insignificant. And similarly with identity fraud, which has now become a bit of the buzzword. The government keeps on making this claim about it being 1.7 billion pounds or something a year. But when you look at their figures, and we did, and when you ask the industry bodies if what the government is saying is true, They just go, we don't recognise these figures. Government claims £500 million in card-based fraud. So we went to Apex, who's the card issue, it's a card body for the financial services sector, and we said again, so how much of this is to do with identity fraud, not just general card fraud? They said, well, about 34 million. So again, £500 million down to 34 million. Lots of overclaiming so that they've got a good reason to wave their ID cards around as a sort of solution, but no real hard evidence that ID cards will actually do anything about it. And their constant claim they have is, well, look, why should we worry about having ID cards because they're in 20 odd countries across sort of Europe? Well, which of those countries has eliminated fraud or illegal working or not suffered some form of terrorism or something? If this sort of claim, or if these claims were real, there would be some evidence out there. It really is just about the government taking control of people's personal information and getting into their lives.
I mean, what is the potential? Let's assume the government has no malign intentions. But what is the potential in the future if perhaps we had a less enlightened government?
Well, there are all sorts of things that you can do once you actually own the master copy of someone's personal information. If you have a card which is about accessing services, healthcare, benefits, all of those things, you can, and the powers are there in the law, the Secretary of State can withdraw the card. We've got literally a new form of penal regime, a personal prison. Deny. It's not like house arrest. You just make someone an unperson. If you haven't got your card, but the card is required to get those things that you need to exist in civil society and in your day-to-day life, you just get hung up in this permanent sort of bureaucratic loop. And what do you do then? I mean, that really would drive, I think, people underground. And that's like I say, a really quite scary way of looking forward. Maybe sort of, it doesn't have to be. We don't have to think or posit some future sort of really quite bad regime to see that people's lives are going to be affected like that anyway, because no government system is perfect. No government system works 100% of the time, and for 100% of people. So that sort of thing is going to happen to people even if there isn't a malign intent behind it, just through pure administrative error or technical error or the system just getting jammed up. People will be denied things which they paid their taxes for, which they have every rights to have, but they will be denied because the computer says no.
And so in that situation, for a period, an unspecified period, until the problem is sorted out,
you're right,
they will have no identity
That's it.
and no access to any of these services.
This is the problem. When the government says, we take the master copy of your personal information and we will tell other people who you are, they interpose themselves into every single aspect of your life, every relationship, every official transaction, even potentially, with your bank. I mean, talking about if you open up a bank account, if you have to show a government ID card and then they get to the point where to draw out money above a certain amount, you have to also just swipe your ID card, you could be denied access to your own cash. I mean, we're talking about fairly extreme consequences, and I'm not saying that this is necessarily going to happen, but the way they have written the law, the way they are designing the scheme, this is a distinct possibility at some point in the future.
So, in effect, instead of the state being the servant of the people, the state will reassert itself through this new technology as the master of the people.
You've got it, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, these people are servants, and I think they've just stepped over a line at some point, and it's a part of, I don't know, maybe an authoritarianism that's come through in sort of recent years, and this system is the very definition of turning the relationship between the citizen and the state 180 degrees. These people are not our masters. They serve us. They should not be telling us who we are. We put them in place to do a job, and that's what they need to do.
Can you foresee circumstances where things may be implemented, things may sail along quite well, and then some point down the line we have some kind of social chaos. Let's say climate change happens, gets out of control. There are some scenarios by respected scientists would suggest that large parts of southern England will become awash with ocean and tidal surges, become uninhabitable. There'll be large movements of people in different parts of the country to escape floodwaters and so on. And this will happen on a very regular basis, that perhaps millions of homes may eventually become uninhabitable and unsaleable. Now, in those kind of circumstances, I can foresee, a pressure on government to dictate solutions about where people must move to, and I suppose the ID card scheme would be a very effective way of ensuring compliance.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Once you're in a situation where you have control, where you are basically saying, oh, we know where this person is because we know what they're doing, who they're interacting with, and we can basically stop them from doing anything at any point that we want to. That's the ultimate means of control. It's the power of civil life and death over people. So, as you say, in extreme circumstances, times of social or environmental sort of chaos, upheaval, or what have you, with a system like that in place, the government of the time is almost bound to use it. These things do not get, just left on the shelf and benignly just chug along. The evidence is from our own history. The two identity card systems that we've had previously in Britain during the First World War and the Second World War. When they're brought in for a couple of three purposes, for conscription, for rationing, for maybe national security, to check that you aren't a foreign national or something. When a few years later you look at the World War II cards, I think they developed something like 37 or 38 purposes by the time they actually, the British public just got so sick of them that someone stood up, Clarence Wilcox stood up and said, no, I'm not going to show my ID card to a policeman.
Which brings me in the last point to say to you, do we have any hope of stopping the ID card scheme at this stage?
Absolutely.
Or is it a foregone?
No, absolutely we do, because the government's plan requires that they line up 60 million people, interrogate them, fingerprint them, and then issue them with a card. We don't have to comply with that. And what we're saying to people now is, apply for a passport. If you haven't already got one, buy yourself 10 years freedom from this process. If you've got a passport already, but it's got only a few years to run, renew your passport, and you won't get dragged into this process for a few years. Then we'll do our job, and with the help of our supporters, we're growing all the time, and we do have broad political support. All the opposition parties in Parliament are against this. The Tories have pledged to abolish the scheme were they to come into power. We can actually defeat this.
Well, Phil, let's hope that we see the demise of this government and a new government committed to defending people's liberties and abolishing this costly scheme.
Yes.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Next week on Talking for Tatchell, I'll be interviewing Nikolai Alexeyev, the leader of the Russian gay rights movement. Please join me for Talking with Tatchell next week. Thank you.